Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available afterwards at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald. My name is Hamani Gupta Carlson, and I'm a professor at Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York, as well as a community-based farmer and writer. So I want to open our show tonight first by offering respect to the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. The Haudenosaunee is a confederacy of 6 nations, including the Mohawk, who are the original caretakers of much of upstate New York. Their lands lie north of the Catskill Mountains and west of the Hudson River. They extend north into southern Quebec and Ontario and west past Niagara Falls. So in acknowledging them, I acknowledge their longstanding relationship with the state and federal governments and my own status as a settler on their lands. So with that said, our guest tonight is Rhonda Binda. Rhonda self-describes herself as a master network with a unique capability of identifying needs and initiating creative actions. Her current work provides ample evidence that this capability is real. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Smart Regions Initiative, chair of the South Asian American Voice, and vice president of a leadership academy known as Guyanese Girls Rock. And previously, she served in the State Department under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, and was part of the Obama-Biden transition team from November 2008 through January 2009. So Rhonda, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I actually want to begin by asking you to tell us a little about your current affiliations and what their goals are. So what is Smart Regions Initiative, South Asian American Voice, and Guyanese Girls Rock Foundation?
So thank you so much for asking. As you know, I've worked in private sector, public sector, in nonprofit, and I've also I'm like yourself, I also teach. And I think that from that broad experience in the past 5 or 6 years, I've used it to create new organizations, looking to fill the gaps where I saw that there could be more development, more of a need. And so for the Smart Regions Initiative, what we're doing is connecting cities and communities by technology, by transportation, and by bringing more solutions around becoming more resilient and sustainable. And a couple of years ago, one of our achievements I'm still so very proud of is getting a call from Congress to be able to help them set up a Smart Cities Caucus, really to bridge the divide between technology and technologists and government. South Asian American Voice, we're a nonprofit organization, and we are creating a unified voice for collective action and rights in the South Asian communities through civic education and empowerment, economic independence and empowerment, cultural understanding, including interfaith, and through community service. And so once again, there was somewhat of, I thought, a need to bring together our diverse community and for us to be able to speak with a unified voice. And so we're still building this organization. It's about 5 years old, but this past year, especially during the pandemic times, we've been extremely active. And so I'm really proud of where we are there now. And Guyanese Girls Rock Foundation, it was originally came out of a social media campaign, and the founder had about 20,000, 23,000 followers, and thought, hey, let's take, the social media campaign that uplifts Guyanese American women, and then also Guyanese women globally in the diaspora, and celebrates them, and let's see if we can turn this into something positive in a more tangible, tactical way, where we now host on Saturdays a high school leadership academy that goes beyond what is normally taught in high school, and we help the girls with career choices and paths, internships, mentorship, exposing them to other women leaders across the New York City area, and volunteer opportunities, as well as helping them prepare and to apply for scholarships for college.
Wow, that's quite a bit. That's really amazing. I was interested in the panel that you hosted through South Asian American Voice and some other organizations on the swastika issue, because we actually did a show a few months ago regarding that. And I just thought that was a really interesting coalition building effort. And so I'm breaking from my script a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could just talk a bit about that.
I'm so glad that you asked about that. I thought that maybe at the end would come around there, but thank you for bringing it up immediately. We are so proud that, it's great to be able to focus for South Asian American Voice, on just all the things that we actually really do need to do in terms of building our own leadership. But this year in particular, we've been able to extend beyond on a regular basis, working with all communities across the board, including with the Jewish community. And, at first it's, we held a few programs that are more community service oriented. And now it seems like we're getting more substantive into the interfaith sort of talks directly, right? And we've had other interfaith talks with several faiths around, but this really is talking about the use of this symbol and how it was misappropriated by Hitler. Yeah. And then you become a hate symbol. And, this is not the first time this has happened over history. We've seen it with even, the cross and other iconic symbols that mean so many different things to so many people. But I learned a lot because, in my research, I realized that this is something that's been around for 13,000 years.
Yeah.
And that it has such a deep and positive meaning to so many Asian cultures. And I have to tell you, even just this past weekend with Diwali, I participated in my first puja, and now I'm noticing it everywhere. And it didn't really hit me the same way, but I'm seeing how important it is as a sacred symbol for so many Buddhist, Hindu, and other Eastern faiths. And so I'm so glad that we're able to open up this conversation, because it is such a difficult issue for so many people. And, I grew up also looking at it sort of cringing because of not understanding all the history behind it. But I think it's unfortunate that hate groups and white supremacist groups can co-opt, something in this way and just really, turn it into a, more of a demonic sort of, purpose. And I think that it's time that we start reclaiming and, telling the true history behind a lot of what we see from face value, but we don't necessarily understand all the history behind it because we probably are only looking back, a few decades. And so there's a lot of hurt, and it has a lot of deep meaning also to Jewish people. And so we have to figure out, is there a way? Is it even possible to be able to, give it validity again and mainstream?
Yeah, that is
Western culture.
Yeah, it's such an important issue, and it's actually evoking a lot of questions about caste, which is one of the issues that I'm actually exploring in my own work. So it would be great to actually have you back with some of the representatives from the Jewish community at some point on our show to really just kind of hear both perspectives a little bit more.
Well, the interesting thing is that I owe so much to my mentors from the Jewish community, because in a lot of ways we're modeling Savoy's after some of the councils that bring together their diverse community. And I've been mentored and sort of following that footprint. And so that blueprint, I'm sorry. Yeah. So it's been they've been very supportive. And so when they asked, of course, we agreed to partner with them. Although I understand that this is a difficult issue that we are just beginning to fully grasp and understand.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit and actually just ask you a little bit about your own background, your personal background, and how that connects with the kind of work that you're doing now.
I think that, growing up with, immigrant parents, they have had this, spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation. just so sort of naturally, and anybody that would pick up and leave their homeland and, to try something new. So I've always thought I've been sort of, a doer in that sense. And, moving into these projects, really, I started to look at entrepreneurship more from the lens of social entrepreneurship, where, where you're developing, funding, implementing solutions, not necessarily for a monetary a purpose solely, but also for social, cultural, and environmental purposes, and to work on those issues. And so I've moved into this, sort of space of social entrepreneurship, because I'm just passionate about how can we generate a positive return on the work that we're doing and make a positive impact on society. And so I think it's sort of that mix of having an immigrant background, and always being sort of creative, and molding those two things together with my passion for service, and that's that's the best that I can explain, sort of how this winding path.
Yeah, no, but that is actually striking so many chords. Also, I remember I was talking to my father just about a month ago, and he's in his late 80s, but my parents immigrated from India in the early 60s, even before the 1965 Immigration Act. And one of the things he said was that he didn't have any mentors. He didn't have anybody who gave him a clear path. He just went from one place to another following advice that seemed to make sense. And it struck me that probably prepared him and my mother very well for leaving India in 1961 and landing in this place where, you didn't have the kind of networks, the kind of global media, the kind of familiarity that perhaps immigrants who came later have. And I said, that probably actually prepared them very well for building a life here and raising children and me. Yeah. So, as I was doing research for tonight's show, it really struck me that our society needs creative problem solving. So I'm going to go through a bunch of the current crises that we're facing: the COVID-19 pandemic, the collapsing American economy, climate change, the recent presidential election, where I'm not quite sure, I haven't checked the news lately, but it doesn't appear that the sitting president has agreed to concede as yet. And I just kind of want to know what a solution from your perspective would be to some of these issues. So, let's start with the pandemic. It just seems relentless, and it almost seems like another lockdown might be coming. So, what do we do? How do we solve this on a personal level, on a collective level? How do we stay healthy? How do we stay sane? How do we keep connecting with our families and loved ones, even if we can't see them? And how do we build community? I mean, so much of what you do is about building community.
So, this is, completely, unpredictable at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
It's really turned my life upside down, but, working with technologists and working with the cutting edge, innovators, I know that there are solutions that exist. I think we have more of a human problem in getting those solutions to the hands of the right people. For example, there are countries that had delivered, to each home, ways of testing. There are countries that have employed contactless tracing, techniques in hotspots. I mean, the technology exists. I think that we have a coordination problem. Specifically in the United States, because we do have such, I would say, a rich and diverse system, multi-layered government that needs better coordination among the community, state, city, local, and federal. And so I think that we are going to overcome the pandemic once we can get all these pieces to fit together and work together, including at the individual level, and that we figure out that we can use technology in a better way to be able to trace and to take more preventative matters tactics. So I think that we're moving in the right direction. It seems to me that the vaccine is being tested, and then it will be a matter of deployment and logistics there. But you also touched on the coping of what are we supposed to be doing during this time. How are our families supposed to be coping with everyone being at home and living at home and working at home together? And there's I think there's been a lot of struggle there for so many people, depending on their individual situation. And at the same time, I think there's been a bigger awareness in terms of the mental health issues that I think a lot of times have been overlooked because we are generally so busy and have so many other outlets. I think it's something now that if, maybe even 5 years ago, talking about mental health wouldn't have, resonated with so many people as it does today, because we've all been forced to slow down.
Yeah.
And really understand that this is a significant issue. So I'm hoping that what happens is that in addition to using telehealth for addressing COVID issues, that we start to look at whether it's streaming, meditation, yoga, chat groups. I know that I'm an attorney, and I know there are a lot of attorney support groups that have emerged throughout various bar associations. And how can we still connect with each other since we can't see each other? But let's again try to make sure that we are connected, and people do have this way to meet and to continue to discuss and dialogue. But I'm biased, obviously, because my background is in technology.
Yeah.
But how do we leverage that during this difficult time? And then what will the new normal look like? Will we continue to be able to use some of these tools to make healthcare and mental health and other sorts of coping mechanisms, whether it's, downloading a workout video to keep you, physically healthy, or it's, a comedy, show that, so that you have a little break during your day. So what would that look like? And how can we make sure that people have access to these tools, and so that we're able to still, feel somewhat human and deal with some of our challenges, both physically and mentally by being in.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm a teacher just like you are, and I teach online, and I have quite a bit of contact with technology. But I also remember back in those days before March, where we were actually lamenting the fact that people were isolating themselves by spending so much time on smartphones, so much time, you would be out in the community, but you would be glued to your phone. And so you wouldn't really be connecting with the people around you. You would be connecting with the world on your phone. And now it's almost like we have to do that. And I wonder, what's going to be the outcome. Technology is great, but at some point, we have to turn it off.
Certainly. I remember last year for Christmas, one of the gifts I looked at was like sort of a lockbox for your smartphone. And I'm one of those people, if I happen to misplace or lose my phone, I'm happy about it because you get a break. But maybe we're gaining a new appreciation. Maybe when things open up again, we will run away from our screen.
Yeah.
Because we'll be so foundered by it.
Yeah.
At that point.
Well, maybe we'll treat our screens differently. We'll have a different kind of respect for the good things that they can give us, and maybe we'll filter out all the junk.
Right.
Yeah. So the economy, it makes sense to stay in, but at the same time, that really has a terrible effect on the economy. It makes sense to drive a lot less. and work at home because that's safer and it maybe is better for the climate. But, you know, all of these things have really dire economic impacts. What, from the standpoint of being a creative problem solver, what's the solution?
Well, I'm extremely concerned about the fate of our small businesses. And that, it seemed to me that it was more difficult for smaller businesses to access the traditional loans, and the emergency loans were also somewhat, it was somewhat difficult to access because small businesses sort of operate on a more ad hoc manner and don't necessarily have the history and the backup and the financials all just handy ready. And so, especially a lot of the mom and pops. And so, I think what we're going to have to do is really work with, the Small Business Administration, our banks, maybe incentivize our banks to go a little bit deeper, and so that, they're reselling a lot of these loans anyway, right? And they're practically forgiven if, in so many cases if they're backed by SBA, but they need to do a little bit harder work, I think, in making sure that these loans are reaching, Main Street and in diverse neighborhoods as well. We already know that there are so many, just existing biases, and so it also seems to me that it's, in particular, minority-owned businesses have been particularly, particularly worried about as well.
Yeah.
And this whole concept around online to offline, we see a lot of other countries doing this well. Not sure that we've really, in the United States, other than, companies like Amazon, have really taken advantage of this. And this might be the time for small businesses to think, okay, how can I also make sure there's already a shift going to e-commerce? How can I make sure that I have a presence also online? How can I perhaps arrange locally a way for delivery, and just thinking outside the box and trying something new, in terms of, jobs and business in general. We have to upskill, we have to reskill. I mean, I have friends that are taking classes in professions where they will be able to work from home, because they're learning how, to test software or develop websites, or, graphics design and e-commerce. So I just think that it's time now, while we have things are a little slowed down, to think about, where can I think about your strengths, where are your skill sets, and then how can that transfer into some of these newer burgeoning economies?
Yeah. It's reminding me, early in the pandemic, just before the lockdown, I remember reading an article about Isaac Newton. And maybe you saw it also, but apparently during the bubonic plague, he was exiled, essentially, or he was put into seclusion for safety purposes at, his home for about a summer and a half, a year and a half. And this was during his years that he was attending college. But because he was at home with his books, pretty much alone, that was where a lot of his theories actually developed, was during that time period. And so I always keep thinking, what's the genius that's going to come out of this pandemic? I mean, we're all kind of in seclusion, and we're a very different society, obviously, but we're also kind of very much the same kind of society that we were in that, in that age. And I'm curious, maybe some of this e-commerce, this electronic communication is the genius that's going to emerge.
I do think so, that there's an opportunity there. I know right now we just closed school again in New York City, but there really is an opportunity to expand education, and somewhat democratize education.
Yeah.
That students who are differently abled can access either specific curriculum that is more tailored to them, or that is more challenging, or not, just depending on what their subject matter is. If they perhaps want to do something more along the lines of, arts, they can probably go online and find that class versus the traditional. So I think that it's going to force us to understand that there are more options. And then business-wise, I do think that companies are now realizing that they should probably think more in a more modern way, and become more aware of some of the resources that are there for the sustainability. And personally, I mean, if there's never been a time where I think I've done more reflecting myself, and getting back with eating healthier. I mean, I think I used to eat most of my meals out. Now I can't believe I'm cooking and I'm planting and I'm all of it, I went to church regularly, but now I know I can access it every day. I don't have to just do it on the weekends and that sort of thing. So I just think, it's forcing us to use technology in new and different ways. And hopefully, like you said, more positive ways.
Yeah. So what are you planting?
I'm so proud that I have some huge sunflowers and mint and basil and evergreen and a few other plants out there.
That's awesome.
Next year, I'll try actual real food.
Okay. So the COVID gardens continue with all hope. So I want to talk a little bit about this presidential election now. And I have, maybe these questions are a little crazy, but I do want to ask them. Especially since you were part of the you were in the White House for a while, and then you were part of the transition team back in 2009.
Yes, and I'm going to ask you to hold 1 second. I'm just going to grab my charger, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So while our guest is recharging, I'm going to just say real quickly that we will not be hosting a show next week. We're going to take Thanksgiving off, and even amidst this pandemic, we're going to celebrate it in a low-key way. And I just want to wish everybody who's been following us for the past several months a really happy and safe holiday. And I also really want to express my great gratitude for you being, for all of you who have been watching the show, because it's really made, it's really made our day. And, in terms of positive outcomes from the pandemic, this has certainly been one for me, and I really am very appreciative. So on that note, I'll just pause for a second as well while we wait for Rhonda Binda to return.
I'm back.
Okay, great. Oh, okay. I didn't have to put you back in the screen.
About that.
Okay.
I thought it was
yeah. So anyway, let's just kind of talk. We're kind of close to the end of time, but we can go a little bit over since we had a few breaks. But I want to just start with the presidential election. Why isn't it over from your perspective?
Oh, wow. So I actually worked in the Clinton-Gore White House when this unfortunately was a very similar scenario. I was working in the West Wing when the Supreme Court around December 15th decided the case in President Bush's favor. And so I've seen this unfortunately before. I had the wonderful opportunity of working on the Obama-Biden transition team because they called a lot of people back from the former Democratic administration to help out. And I have to tell you, it was, even though I remember, I don't know if you remember this. I don't know if you remember this.
I do. I definitely remember. I
have to admit, I didn't do this. Like, one of the things that happened when President George W. Bush came into the White House everyone removed the W's from the the keyboards. It's a sort of like
yes, I do remember that.
And so, I mean, it wasn't exactly I wouldn't say 100% smooth transition, but it was some situation to now where there are lawsuits, and it seems to me that that this is more, no pun intended, trumped up, where there are, sort of a baseless, accusations about voter fraud. And it just so happens that, three of the lawyers that worked on President Bush's legal team are people that were subsequently nominated by Republican presidents and are actually sitting on the Supreme Court now. And I think that's what he's banking on. I find it sad that we're playing these types of games in the middle of a pandemic, with so many people hurting, and that we really just need to come together as a country, heal, work together to get over this and get our businesses and our country back up and running.
So if you were having dinner with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, what would you tell them to do right now in this current political climate where they are the president and vice president-elect, but they haven't been given the kind of like official political green light to go ahead? What kind of advice would you give them to assume leadership right now? And I don't mean like staging a coup or something, but what can you do to kind of assure us?
You sure that's not on the table? No, I'm kidding. But I think that they've done a lot of great preparation. I did serve on a few policy committees this summer. In Obama-Biden transition, we had an automobile crisis, a housing crisis, a financial crisis, airline crisis. I mean, name it, we had the problem at that point in time. This is obviously quite different because it's health related, and it, and this is something that was not created by the markets, and so it's a completely different type of animal. But I know that the path that we collectively as a team who worked behind the scenes all summer and leading up to election, we have a plan, and I would tell them to lead from where they are. So you may not be sitting necessarily in the White House, but the cadre of people that they have that stepped up to help on transition, let's start taking action, sort of like in the way that I've done with my side projects outside of government, that we've been able to make an impact and make a difference. And so to the extent that they can't immediately access and turn on the government resources, they can still continue to plan, put together a plan of action for that, and then have the stakeholders that they have around the table that they've gathered around the country in support of their campaign, to work together and try to tackle this at maybe a regional level, and put those heads together to be able to make a difference in whatever way they think they can, because like every day that goes by, it's costing us more lives. And in the meantime, we just have to be creative and try to lead and try to make a difference from the great group that they've already assembled, to try to lead from exactly where they are at this point in time. And hopefully, the transition will happen in the next few months.
Yeah.
Well, they'll have the entire apparatus.
Hopefully the next few weeks, the next few months would put us into beyond January 20th. So I want to close out with just a couple questions about demographics. It's been known for quite a while that at some point whites were going to become a numeric minority in the United States, and that African Americans, Latinx, and Asian Americans and other groups were going to start increasing in numbers. I mean, it's been a demographic fact really I remember writing stories about it back in the early 90s. But I'm struck by a point that Isabel Wilkerson made in her book Caste, that no Democrat in recent history has won the White House with a majority of the white vote. That the Republican Party can always count on the white vote, whereas Democrats come into office largely through support from African Americans and increasingly Latinx and Asian Americans. And so I'm kind of wondering, from your perspective, what is this potential impact? We've got a growing Asian American population, and we've got a diminishing white population. So how is this going to start to change the face of American politics? And how do we kind of adapt to that?
You know, what's so interesting is that in this recent election, there was, you know, also there were some interesting stats on the increase in appeal in certain parts of the country by people of color and their interest in the Republican Party. So, you know, I know that we are becoming more of a multicultural community and society, but I think it's hard to look at us in blocks, whether you're Black, Latino, or Asian. I mean, one stat that I thought was so interesting is that 30% of Muslims voted Republican. And I think we have to look at it more in terms of look at all the diversity and all of what makes up these different groups. And sometimes the where you are on the spectrum can also be very much tied to your religious background, whether you are Muslim or Catholic and so I think that that it's something to look at. We do know that we're pretty much majority minority, but I push back sometimes on the labels that we use to categorize whether that means that 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 Democrats should take for granted now, because we already know, since this is that they're going to be ahead, because this is the new the new trend in the demographics. And far too often I see the communities of color on either side somewhat neglected. And I think you saw that that when we looked at post-election feedback, you saw that especially in Texas, in some of the Latinx communities, that there was a sort of an assumption where Democrats didn't necessarily campaign at all. But I think it's dangerous to assume that just because you should expect that vote. Now, I know the numbers do sort of show that, but I know that also as a person of color that I often feel somewhat marginalized because of that assumption. And eventually the party runs risk of losing support.
Yeah. So very important not to take communities of color for granted, and also equally important not to see them as a monolithic block, because obviously they're not. Okay, so I think on that note, we're out of time, and I feel like this was a very lovely conversation, which will hopefully be continued on future shows.
I hope so.
Yeah, but for now, thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our weekly Asian American Herald show. I'm Hamani Gupta Carlson, and my guest has been Rhonda Binda. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook-based news media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region of New York and far, far beyond. So please continue to send us your story ideas and look for the recording of the show on our Facebook page. I wish everyone a safe and happy Thanksgiving, and I look forward to returning to the show again on Thursday, December 3rd. Thank you all very much, and thank you especially, Rhonda.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. Good night.
Have a good night.